Of the top 3 teams in the NA standings, Gale Force Esports upset last weekend. Team 8 upset last weekend. Now we see if Team Freedom can do the same versus the Colossus that is Tempo Storm. Welcome back to HGC North America. Dreadnought, do you believe that Team Freedom has what it takes to upset Tempo Storm?
I honestly don't know. That's how I'll leave it. Just no clue whether or not they do. I feel like for the sake of North America and at least something remaining the same, Tempo Storm winning the series dominantly would probably be better for us, but whether or not they have what it takes, I don't know. Because again, they were able to beat B-Step, who took out just No Tomorrow, who took Gale Force, who's the second place team. So
Yes.
in theory, through that staggered series of wins, this should be a very, very close series, but Tempo Storm has also been the most dominant team here by far in North America.
I think you'll agree with me in that it does come down a little bit to what Team Freedom shows up this week, as the first week and second week were quite different, but we'll talk more on that in a little bit. Let's first take a look at the standings for North America and see where both of these teams sit. It's obvious that Tempo Storm is at the top, and dominantly, even more dominantly so, with both Team A and Gale Force Esports losing series last week. 9-1, a 2-series difference puts Tempo Storm at the top. They have their eyes set on the #1 seed once again at the end of this part so that they can just claim the spot at mid-season brawl. Team Freedom, they're still sitting at the bottom. They do not want to lose any more series. They really don't want to get put into crucible position.
Yeah, and it's absolutely crucial. This is a perfect starting point. If they somehow was able to get this upset, to be able to avoid that at absolutely all costs.
Now, we've talked a lot about Tempo Storm and how they are going to be able to maintain the top spot in the standings. Let's check in with their schedule and see who they have left in Part 2 to face, because it does come down to which matchups are left for them, who they've been able to defeat. Because when we look at that, it really does matter a lot, especially because Gale Force Esports is a team that has yet to face them. They're going up against Team Freedom today. On Sunday, they will face Team Naventic. After that, only 2 series left for them.
And both of those, Gale Force is the one where, you put that as a 50-50. You can go, I can see that going either way. But, if things hold true here for Tempo Storm, that means they should, be able to beat Naventic, be able to take out B-Step here, and take out Team Freedom would lock in 100% Tempo Storm going to the mid-season brawl. They would be North America's #1 representative without a doubt. Looking at the schedule, taking out one of the 2 teams, we would expect to be able to beat them already, puts them very comfortably there at the top now that the upsets have happened.
And gosh, Tempo Storm was at the top of the standings at the end of Part 1, but it was quite a different story. They had several 3-2 victories, even versus Team Freedom. Freedom were able to take them to game number 5. But now you look at that, a 3-0, a 3-0, and only dropping 1 game so far and throughout all of Part 2, 2 superstars, bodes very well for Tempo Storm.
Yeah, they seem to have, less tolerance for just any kind of mistake. They seem to be way more structured, way more aggressive as a group of players, really forcing the issue whenever they seem to feel like they have the upper hand. And it's nice and exciting to see that out of Tempo Storm so far. The question is the benefit, the newer version of Freedom, even the best version of Freedom, if they show up today, is that still enough to be able to take out Tempo?
Well, we talked to both of these teams, so let's hear from them about how they plan to approach this crucial matchup.
I feel like we have a really good idea on how Tempo Storm drafts. I think we have a very similar play style, and I feel like if we play to our utmost how we've been playing, we should be able to take the map off them. The few weaknesses that Tempo Storm has, we're looking to capitalize on Psalm being out of position, being too aggro, and Fury with overextending maybe in a bush with his team. We're looking to capitalize on communication errors mostly, so we're looking to get as many mistakes out of them as we can. We have a problem with losing the first game, so I think if we can pull through on the first game, we'll be in good shape.
We're definitely not taking the series against Team Freedom lightly. We do see that they're a pretty promising team, and they had an upset recently against B-Step, and they showed that they can be dominant at times, but we do think that their drafting is still relatively predictable because they are still that slightly inexperienced team. So we definitely still feel confident, but we're not going to let our guard down.
Freedom have been gaining a lot of traction throughout part 1 somewhat, but it was inconsistent. Now in part 2, they did lose their first series to Superstars, but then able to beat B-Step 3-1 in a 3-0 victory over Team Niventic. So they're looking to keep that going forward because inconsistency has been a problem for them in the past.
I think it extends just even beyond Freedom. I feel like it's a bit of a North American even, really, because you know, the fact that our number 2 and 3 is sitting with Team 8 and Gale Force now, seeing those upsets kind of coming out. Tempo Storm is the closest thing to a consistent roster that exists in all of North America over the past really year of competitive Heroes of the Storm. And that consistency, I feel like they've only upgraded theirs to be better and better and better. But for almost every other team here in North America, you know, just expecting the same performance from them from more than 2 weeks in a row seems asking a bit too much.
And the drafting that Caterpillar called out into question is a great point because we've noticed that too from Team Freedom is because they are a newer team, they do stick to what comfort heroes have brought them success in the past. However, that was one issue of why they struggled so much in week 1 of part 2, and that's what they were able to change last week. So whether or not they can continue that forward in the drafts. Speaking of the draft, game number 1 is just about to start, starting with the Battleground. Tempo Storm picking Cursed Hollow for game number 1. As far as bans, Infernal Shrines and Sky Temple.
The Sky Temple ban seems a little weird. You know, it's nothing. It's not a major red flag or anything. It's just not normal to see that banned out here. But the fact that we are going to be going to Cursed Hollow, I feel like this is only going to benefit Tempo Storm. It allows for very different styles when it comes to the map itself. You can commit to a macro playstyle. You can commit to a teamfight-oriented playstyle. And when you can flex and you're less predictable, makes me always give strength to Tempo. Whenever that diversity of approach to a map exists, I would naturally give it to the better team.
Tempo is 7-1 right now on Cursed Hollow, even though this is not a normal Battleground choice for them. In fact, they have yet to play on Cursed Hollow in part 2, so that does give some mystery to what their drafting will bring for Team Freedom, and Tempo might be looking to use that to their advantage since, of course, they did say that they are looking to focus on Freedom in draft. Also, we have to keep in mind, as with Muradin in the last series, Greymane in this series, both teams have been putting a lot of focus on our Worgen hero.
Yeah, Tempo Storm it felt like the first team to prioritize Greymane and Arthas in North America, to where the rest of the North American scene has kind of met up to their standards of where they fell in the draft. And I personally, I agree with Tempo Storm. We said that very early on. When they started drafting the Arthas and the Greymane higher, I was like, you know, this is where I expected to see these heroes picked up here for North America. So I like to see that. Malf is going to be the first pick for Freedom. Bans are the standard. So where does Tempo Storm go here for their draft? With Cursed Hollow for Tempo Storm, what do they prioritize?
I like that Malfurion pick, though, for Team Freedom. Not only are they taking away Tempo Storm's highest picked hero, also one of their highest win rate heroes, sitting at 80%, I believe, with their Malfurion, yes. So taking that away, Greymane Abathur, though, wow, what a power play on Cursed Hollow. Bringing up Greymane even more. It is a favorite pick of both of them. Just like Malfurion, we saw Collusion have some money Twilight Dreams last week.
And what that does is now it makes the Arthas a must-pick ban by Freedom in one of their next 2 rotations, because you do not give the Arthas Abathur composition and the Greymane on top of that. It just screams Arthas is an absolute legend here in this draft. So now Freedom has to decide, do they want to take that themselves, and is that something they feel comfortable using, or instead, are they going to end up dropping that in a ban and move a different direction in the draft? Either way, there is always a Tyrael as a pick, no matter unless they pick one and ban the other. So it is possible.
Yeah, especially picking Arthas now. Also, Falstad to get some global presence on the Battleground. Try to push back the Abathur more, and Tempo Storm immediately hovering a Dahaka ban, so showing that they don't want to get any further globals, but they also don't want to allow Team Freedom to completely have that in their control.
And by having the Abathur, it kind of is going to go even. Man, they ban out the Valera. Are they trying to bait them into a Zeratul? For any reason. That could be just a stab at Psalm's hero pool.
Maybe I feel like they just, if they have to deal with one of them, they would rather deal with the Zeratul than Valera.
I just feel like that Valera ban kind of came out of nowhere. Yeah, it is saying that they prefer to deal with the Zeratul over the Valera, but again, with the Arthas and the Tyrael threat and what they provide, they did deny one of those, but leaving up the other here for Tempo. that is, man.
Do Tempo Storm want Zeratul here? You would think yes.
It kind of, not really. So it's okay, but it's inconsistent because now you only make it that much more difficult for your play style to approach the team fights. I guess, how do we say this? For that question specifically, Tempo Storm can take the Zeratul, but they have to maneuver their draft into one direction, and they've left it open, right? They've by leaving that as a last pick option. So what they're looking for on the side of Freedom is how many people are going to be overly vulnerable to a double Zeratul dive versus how many are just more afraid of a double Greymane, more consistent, and that style damage. If they are overly vulnerable to a clone dive, like multiple more squishies are going to be picked up here, you go for the Zeratul. Otherwise, you go for the reliable DPS.
Does Freedom want Zeratul? They have Malfurion and Arthas to follow up. They have Falstad too to be able to control.
They do. They should want the Zeratul. And the Freedom
especially Void Prison and Sanctification.
Yeah, and not only that, it just works with buying time. We talk about Malf and Arthas, how that can work out. The only thing that says no to me is the fact that they already have Gus. But even then, it's still usable. It's just, again, like we saw with B-Step, it makes you time your CC very proper when you have that much control. There it is. It's going to be the Zeratul and the Anuba Rack locked in. Tempo Storm.
Tempo Storm, Cattle has either been playing a second warrior or Greymane. But Greymane doesn't have to be Cattle. It could be one of the other players, specifically Som. This time, though, it's going to be Cattle because Illidan.
Tempo. I'm sorry, that kind of, you know, it's making me take a mini here. Okay, so this is, you know, I don't. Okay, so just to vomit the last 20 seconds of my life and trying to think about this. So what we experience with this draft is, but with that last pick, Illidan, it's a very deathball-y, hyper-aggressive composition, but there are so many anti-momentum, counter-initiation, heroics, and tools on the side of Team Freedom here that I feel like doubling down after the Zeratul was an option to pick, risking it towards your last pick, and then baiting out Freedom, saying, hey, what do you want to end up picking it up? And then they take the Zeratul themselves. I feel like Tempo Storm just decided, you know, because they had another option to go with another range a little bit safer, and they were just like, nope, screw it. We committed to the dive. We're going to all in even farther with it. But you have Twilight Dream. You have Arthas, who's a soft counter to the Illidan, even better than he was before. Falstad with Gus, Zeratul with Void, and Anubarak with Locust Swarm or Cocoon. Either way is pretty good at that counter initiation. So I feel like that doubling down was just a huge risk. Absolutely colossal on the side of Tempo.
Well, let's look at how we think Tempo Storm is going to play this Illidan. Very likely it'll be that it is the split push Illidan style, whether or not they even want to commit into the hunt like Gale Force Esports would do as another possible global for them. But into Arthas, into Twilight Dream, you're right. It feels risky. Let's see if it pays off. We're heading into game number 1. Tempo Storm takes on Team Freedom.
We have got a lot to talk about here with the Tempo Storm draft, but for now, here on the blue, Rhaegar is going to be played by the one, the only June. Fury is going to be on to the Tyrael. Cawthon Luck is going to be playing the Slug, the Abathur, Psalm on the Illidan, as always on the front line, and Caterpillar is going to be that Greymane.
Their opponents looking for a monster of an upset are Team Freedom. Collusion back again on the Druid Malfurion. Zugrug playing his Arthas. Insomnia will be the one sharking for kills as Zeratul. Dansky playing Anubarak. And finally, playing Falstad is Nasmus.
So you posture towards the, you know, what are we going to see when it comes to heroics on the Illidan pickup? And so we saw in the second ban phase, once the Abathur was locked in, a Falstad was on the side of Freedom, and Tempo Storm banned out a global. They banned out the Dahaka. And normally when you're like, well, they have the Falstad, why would you ever want to ban another global and not force that ban to your opponents? That comes down to the Abathur is enough to be able to stop one global, but maybe not two. But what they, you know, again, with the draft that Tempo Storm had put themselves into after that secondary ban phase, moving into the Illidan, it just, I've never seen a team posture for like a, hey, Team Freedom, do you want to take this type of composition? And Team Freedom goes, yes. And then Tempo Storm, after Freedom makes a clever second ban, just go, well, we're committed, so we're all in it.
I wonder if this is a choice for Tempo Storm to try to sneak some bosses, even, because there's Illidan Abathur.
I mean, you could, with Adrenal Overload, Illidan can kind of, I don't know, sneak in a boss here and there, because typically you expect the Illidan to disappear from a lane.
Yeah, if they do it once, when it's expected that he would be taking maybe bruisers, for example, and then they just ride on that momentum from there on for the rest of the game.
I mean, it's a strategy they could go with. But even if they do, what does it really gain them? We know early bosses are just so kind of lackluster unless they're around a 2-tribute choke, where you can then be like, well, what do you want? To stop us from this curse, or are you going to stop us from this boss? And it's a lose-lose for your opponents. But
either way, they have strong mercenary control. Having Rhaegar as well as Greymane and Illidan and Abathur had to help any of that. Tempo Storm could possibly just be trying to macro this so hard that Team Freedom are constantly back, and then Tempo doesn't have to worry about any of the pressure that Freedom might be able to put on team fights. I can't wait to see the first team fight, Dread.
yeah, it is going to be awesome to see how it plays out here, especially because gauging who's even stronger 1 through 10 is very, very difficult to do with these drafts. Just based on Illidan compositions, typically 1 through 9 is really, really hard to deal with. Anybody gets split at all, you're just going to be tracked down and killed by the death ball that is Tempo Storm's draft. But the Zeratul is kind of a counter to that. He's very good at the exact same thing with the, flanking around. Arthas is good to be able to buy that peel. So suddenly the 1 through 9 is near even. I probably still give it barely to Tempo.
Yeah, Tempo do have an Abathur, which in general makes it harder to contest the early game objectives, but Caterpillar's diving on, trying to get a kill on Insomnia, and Psalm and Fury show up. First blood for Tempo.
And Zuggrug there on the back line, trying to slow everyone's auto attacks by a little bit of time, being a man down. Psalm is just not carrying. Dansky takes so much damage, goes down there with Caterpillar on that Greymane, and that is going to be a 2 kills already here for Tempo Storm as they pick up the tribute. Abathur soaking the entire time. This is not looking good for Freedom, because we also know the early game of Abathur compositions.
Giants' location favored Team Freedom in the bottom lane, and we will still start to throw the rocks to towers, but at the same time, it took a long time for Tempo Storm's Giants to be cleared out too, and Illidan heading down. So Tempo Storm getting the better of that trade, now looking toward level 7 talents. Team Freedom are getting a start on Bruisers slightly faster, but with June heading over to the same, they'll both have those up for the next tribute.
It's one of the benefits of having the Abathur is you can cycle out who ends up being the individual rotating to the Mercenary itself to make sure you have a better lane matchup. Rhaegar into the Zeratul, not that good. Illidan in the Zeratul, pretty good. So then Rhaegar can volunteer to move out, and even if June can't capture it in his own, Abathur can drop the hat, be able to speed up that process. But Tempo Storm has found a level lead in the early game. Even though they have an Abathur composition, things are looking good. Much like we saw in the last series with B-Step, a late game team when they get the early game, a late game comp when you win the early game feels honestly like you can't lose. If you make it to 10 with an Abathur comp a level before your opponent, you're like, how can you name one situation where I do not win this game other than just flat feeding?
Our Abathur player, Cothenluck, not picking Adrenal Overload. He's still hatting and allowing Psalm to put on the damage, put the pressure on Collusion as the rest of Team Freedom are trying to zone for him. Psalm can dive back and forth, staying alive thanks to the shielding as well, not only from the Abathur hat. Oh my goodness, he stays alive. Tyrael goes down though.
Oh, Cattle's going to keep chasing onto the Zeratul, but meanwhile, Nasmus actually trading to the back line, does not get a kill, and Cattle found himself the Zeratul. Nasmus now without a barrel roll for a couple more seconds. The Abathur hat is going to put him to rest. Luckily, Cattle shows mercy and just doesn't turn on to Dansky too.
So the build for Abathur is Ballisto Spores, which is increasing the range to global and duration of nests, as well as the Vile Nest. So being able to add more control to team fights, this nest will be able to provide vision around bosses too, and alert to when they've been started for opponents. But then the interesting talent I'm checking out is Zealotry for Tyrael, increasing the duration of his righteousness shielding. So understanding that this full death volley divey composition, being able to help support even with Rhaegar and Abathur.
Level 10 is going to be here for Tempo Storm as Freedom picks up their Giants, but Tempo's already got the Giants up on top. Falstad is going to have to rid of those, and with 10, this is going to be Curse Point. The question more so is going to be, what does Tempo Storm get with this? They've already started the boss, so they're going to try and wait for that before they even get this tribute.
The Hunt, Curse Bullet, Sanctification.
Wow.
Everything else is normal, but
I didn't think we would see the Hunt purely based on the fact that we have an Abathur. I did, when you were talking about this split pushing style that we saw of, you know, Gale Force Esports, for instance, fan ventures towards the Hunt, even on maps like Cursed Hollow. When you have a Abathur and only one global to be able to match on the other side, it does feel like survivability and team fighting with Metamorphosis would be more of the focus for Tempo Storm. But we'll see how it works out here. For now, Freedom not anywhere near their 10, so they legitimately are just trying to figure out where Tempo Storm is going to move and siege up.
a boss at the same time as a curse that's heading toward the Keep Towers is so scary. Here comes the Hunt onto Collusion in the back. They are diving in. Fury is right there to join. Still has Sanctification if needed, but remember, this Keep isn't attacking, so it's just the heroes as well as the minions with 1 hit point each. Tempo Storm has their eyes set on a Keep, maybe even more Dread.
Yeah, they might be looking for core if they manage to get a couple of picks. They do have the Sanctification, but that's about all that leads to them being able to get the game. They go in, they have the Illidan start it out, take the damage. He can solo it, so he's going to be fine.
Gust?
Dream and Gust. The shielding is already going to be removed. Ancestral connects 80% onto the core, grouping up for the Sanctification. The Void will buy 5 seconds of time onto the core HP, but I don't think it's going to matter.
No, they have not taken this boss down nearly enough. Tempo Storm diving all over this core is Psalm, and they're going to be able to take it out even as Cattle goes down. Just about the cleanest, fastest Tempo Storm Cursed Hollow game you could hope for.
And you know, it turns out when you pick a late game comp and win the early game, it makes it a lot easier to be able to execute it. Don't get me wrong, a lot of why Tempo Storm was able to end that game at, what was it? We came out to like 7 minutes and 30-something seconds. The only reason is based on the fact that their comp thrives in that with the Sanctification by having the Illidan to be able to tank the core, not lose any of the HP himself. Tempo Storm, again, showing that they are improving on their ability to force an issue whenever they have a lead going, you know, just doing the math there of like, well, no, it makes sense. We can, you know, risk all-inning the core there, and it pays off here for game 1.
One boss, one curse is all she wrote. Tempo Storm have won game number 1.